Chapter 3 Signal. Gray spent his formative years in relative quiet, as opposed to the constant overhanging dread of Mantle. Gray's parents were able to find work in the city while Gray went to primary school, their apartment serving as a nice, cozy place to live. Friends came and went, as they tended to do at that age. In school, Gray found himself to be a perfectly capable student, although he took a particular interest in the science of dust. After having heard much about the stuff from Verdran, both in Mantle and on the airship, he found himself enamored with it. He wished to know everything about it, from its applications to its creation to its origin. He learned of the 4 primordial forms of dust: earth, air, water, and fire, and how to mix them together or refine them to make wildly different results. When he turned 11, he even asked his parents to buy him a youth's home dust mixing set. It was granted, given the conditions of proper safety equipment and plenty of supervision. This became his most used toy, the boy constantly experimenting with dust whenever he came up with new ideas or saw something he liked in his textbooks. The owner of the nearby shop seemed pleased with how Gray spent his allowance at any rate. Gray also learned that he had a knack for games of sleight of hand. Perhaps that was because the first real game he'd been introduced to, rather than the small ones his parents would play with him to stave off the fear, like I Spy or Count the Intact Windows in the Building. Perhaps it was simply Gray subconsciously idolizing Verdran again. Whatever the reason, he came home with a deck of cards one day and spent a good amount of free time fidgeting with them. He'd often play with the other children at his primary school, with strict supervision from his teachers to prevent actual gambling, of course. Gray naturally proved to be superior, with the other children having sparked a competitive urge to take him down. It made sure their daily lunchtimes weren't boring, to be certain. Eventually, though, the time came, as Gray turned 13 years old, that it was time to pack his bag and make ready to attend Signal Academy. While not quite as massive and grandiose a campus as Beacon, the place would prove no less essential to shaping the minds of young warriors. While still covering the essentials for schooling like language and proper lien management, the curriculum took a noticeable step in another direction with the introduction of various combat classes, lore on the creatures of Grimm and the various histories of wars and fighting styles rounded out Gray's day, subjects that caused the now teenage Gray's mind to peak with interest. As much as he proved himself to be an adept academic, Gray found himself struggling in perhaps the most important class of all: practical combat training with Professor Bronwyn. Professor Bronwyn was, for lack of any better terms, a drunk. With his graying hair, permanent stubble, and constant tired circles under those piercing red eyes, the man was an odd duck of a teacher. Any questions of his qualifications to teach were thrown out the window, however, on the very first day. The practical combat training room was shaped more like an arena than a classroom, with massive circular spaces in the center for duels to take place. Bleachers ringed the sides and back of the room with simple metal benches for spectators to sit in. When Gray and his classmates arrived for their first class of the semester, they found Professor Bronwyn in the room alone, standing at the center of the arena and drinking from a flask. When they approached, the man flinched, as if just now realizing that he was supposed to be teaching a class. In a school. Around children.
"There you are," he called. "Here I was thinking you punks all got lost. Everyone sit down, we gotta do all this orientation nonsense."
A very uneasy class of teenagers took random seats at the bleachers, all with eyes swiveling about to try and get accustomed to the room, their teacher, and their classmates. Gray spotted a massive boy in bird-themed armor, a girl with dark skin and a shirt that seemed to shift through every color in the rainbow, and another girl with fiery yellow hair. Gray looked down at his simple ensemble, a gray collared shirt with black slacks, and felt a little self-conscious. Professor Bronwyn grabbed a sheaf of papers from the railing of one of the bleachers and began to read, pacing the arena and squinting really closely at the papers.
"Welcome to Signal Academy," he began. This is the place where we will be molding your young minds and bodies into those of true huntsmen and huntresses. My name is Professor Bronwyn, and I'll be helping you with the body part of that. You kids don't have weapons yet. You'll be making those with Professor Xiaolong. But a good warrior is prepared to fight in any given situation, especially one that puts them at a disadvantage. As such, until you kids actually get your medals all together, I'm going to be training you in hand-to-hand.
Gray nodded to himself. He figured this was going to be part of it. He didn't figure, however, what the professor was about to say next.
So, I want each of you brats to face me, one-on-one. I'm going to find out what I'm working with.
Before Gray's fear could even really register, the boy in armor stood up, proudly declaring, "Oh, I'll be happy to kick your teeth in, old man." Some mutters and snickers slipped out of the crowd as the boy took to the arena with Professor Bronwyn. The professor read from his papers.
Let's see here. Carden Winchester.
Alright then. Come at me, kiddo. Carden immediately charged the drunkard at full tilt, his gauntlet raised to strike. In a flash of movement too fast for untrained eyes to follow, Carden came to a full stop, laid out on the floor, and groaning in pain. When he rolled over onto his back, clutching his abdomen, there was a collective gasp from the students as they saw the fist-sized indentation in the metal armor. Professor Bronwyn wrung his hand in slight pain and offered down.
Don't call me old.
After seeming to shake off that little bout of anger, he turned to the rest of them.
All right. Who's next?
The rest of the trial duels went about as well as the first, though the good professor made sure to be much easier on students that didn't actively antagonize him. Gray silently muttered his thanks that he at least had a sense of fairness. Still, not a single blow was landed on the older huntsman. When it came to be Gray's turn, the match barely lasted more than 2 or 3 swings before he was sliding against the tiles with a rather sore back. The bell finally rang amidst a chorus of pained voices from the class of 20. Professor Bronwyn raised his flask and waved as if they were all just having a friendly chat.
See you kids all next time. Use ice on that one, Carden, it'll hurt less.
Traversing the hallways to introductory weapon mechanics with Professor Xiaolong was arduous and slow, many of the students sporting fresh, tender bruises. Ahead of Gray, the hot-headed girl now identified as Yang Xiaolong sported the largest of grins. Gray didn't have much time to think on the durability of a girl that seemed to radiate heat, though, as he caught a rainbow-colored glint out of the corner of his eye. His eyes went wide as the girl in color-shifting clothes seemed to match his step, offering him a sympathetic smile. Gray kicked himself as he realized that she had gone up against Professor Bronwyn after him, and was too busy nursing his wound to catch her name. Still, she spoke, in her voice light, smooth, and almost melodic.
Gray, right?
He got us good, huh? It was at this exact moment that he realized that he had absolutely no experience talking to girls. The petty debates of boys versus girls that he had experienced in his youth seemed incredibly silly now as he looked upon this somewhat battered angel. Her eyes seemed to shine with that same prismatic glow as her attire. Her skin was a pleasing deep hazel, her hair contrasting her clothes with a warm, inviting brown. Gray's breath seized in his chest, his steps managing to become even more uneasy. As nervous as he was, however, he managed to straighten his posture, summon all of his confidence, and reply, yeah. Miraculously, the girl didn't seem to mind his seeming awe at her presence, and instead offered a small giggle in return. She offered her hand to shake. I'm Arya Prismata. Gray managed to reach her hand at the very least. Gray, I'm Gray. You already knew that, but, yeah. Is everything alright, Gray? She inquired, leaning in front of him to better see his features as they walked. Even partially obscured by scraggly gray hair, she noted, Your face is all red. Did I say something? No, you're fine, Arya, Gray stammered. I just don't usually get to talk with... Arya kindly interrupted him with a friendly tap on his shoulder with her fist. Don't worry so much.
I'm just an aspiring huntress, like you. Except you're gonna be a huntsman.
She nodded once, as if she'd just proffered some sagely advice. A smile grew on Gray's face as they walked to weapons class together. Professor Zhao Long was a fair sight more welcoming than Professor Bronwyn. While this in itself would not be difficult to pull off, Zhao Long wore a warm grin, sandy blonde hair, and tan skin. He even wore khaki shorts, a style that snow-dwelling Gray didn't even know existed until coming to Vale. Yang took a seat just beside Gray while sporting an absolutely giddy smile, and he noted the striking resemblance. Fair enough, since they shared last names. Welcome to Introductory Weapon Mechanics. My name is Professor Zhao Long, and I will be your instructor. I might be a brawler when it comes to the hunt against the creatures of Grimm, but it behooves any good fighter to at least be passingly familiar with a variety of styles. Also, Professor Bronwyn wanted to be the one to beat up kids on the first day. The professor rolled his eyes and continued, gesturing to the weapon racks and workbenches in the back half of the room. I'm going to be working with Professor Bronwyn, exchanging notes on each of your strengths and weaknesses so we can narrow down what sort of weapon worked for you. When the second semester starts, that's when we're going to get you all started on making your own bona fide huntsman's weapon, the one you'll be carrying with you for life. The whole room became charged with excited energy, each young mind swirling with ideas for what their weapon would eventually be. Yang very nearly knocked Gray from his reverie since she was shadowboxing in her seat. A brief introduction was given to each of the generic weapons and tools. Everything was on display, from dust forges and anvils to molds for bullets and fletchings for arrows. They were each allowed to go around to the racks of practice weapons and feel some in their hands. Arya immediately took to a bow that laid against the wall, stringing it up and gently plucking it. Gray drew Verdrin's hunting knife, comparing it one by one to the other daggers in a case full of daggers. Another boy that Gray hadn't met yet found an empty revolver, experimentally twirling it in between his fingers. The boy wore a duster coat to school, a choice Gray found odd. After a good chunk of time spent poking and prodding around various weapons, including a flail that Gray got into a debate with another boy over the potential practicality of, the bell sounded once again for the students to head to their last class. For Gray, that meant aura studies. It also meant that another set of students cycled him for him to be continually fascinated by. Arya had to depart, though, which caused a small pang of disappointment somewhere in his chest. But passing through the doorway to aura class caused him to shelve any emotions he was currently feeling, because this classroom demanded he stop and balk. Gray had seen pictures of the other kingdoms, whenever his parents would drag him to the library. He'd sit down at a table while Noir perused through various tomes of history and trade skills, and he'd pore through books about everything that caught his eye. Stories, books on notable people, books on notable places. He'd even started reading a book on Grimm before quickly reshelving it. Too scary, he'd told Ivora, before being swept up into a hug. When Gray stepped through the door to aura class, his mind immediately snapped back to the pictures of the city of Mistral. Specifically, the tranquil pavilions of the upper class. Despite this being in a publicly owned school, the room was somehow rigged to contain foliage. Vines covered in vibrant, colorful flowers snaked their way this way and that. A small stream cut through the middle of the floor with a wooden bridge going over the top. You gonna move, dude? Gray was shaken out of his reverie when he realized he was standing right in the way of everyone else trying to get into the class. A few mumbled apologies later, and the others were able to share in the view. The boy that had spoken up was the same guy in the duster earlier, trying out the revolver. Their teacher then practically dropped into the room from some suspended plants on the wall, causing everyone to jump in surprise. The older woman got up, spat out some leaves, and put on a smile like she hadn't just pried herself out of an out-of-place ficus. Well, hello students, and welcome to Aura Studies 101. I'm Professor Orman. She looked like the type of person who'd spring for an indoor meditation center. Scraggly hair, loose-fitting clothes, distinct smell of the outdoors clinging to her at all times. To make a long story short, she was able to impart what the year would entail around her, namely learning the nature of aura and semblances, and daily meditation sessions dedicated to drawing them forth. Of course, she would ramble on, despite hundreds of years of application to the science of people's aura, we still can't claim to know everything.
People are cropping up all the time with semblances we've never encountered before. So please don't get discouraged if you don't find yours right away. It could be possible that your soul is simply bearing a much greater power, one that requires a catalyst even greater or more unique than others to utilize.
As it turns out, this was a good thing for Gray to hear before classes really got underway.